Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to welcome all of you in the room and remotely. We will be supported by Liz France as remote moderator. And I would like to welcome our distinguished panelists. And I will ask them to introduce themselves right now, right after I'm done with introducing myself. My name is Imad Hubballah. I am the head of the Lebanese Telecommunication Regulatory Authority and the president of the Arab Regulators Network. I'm happy to be here, and I leave it to Ambassador Verveer.
Thank you. I'm Phil Verveer. I'm the U.S. Coordinator for International Communications and Information Policy.
Please. Robert.
My name is Robert Guerra. I'm a project director of Freedom House's Internet Freedom Program.
Jeff Brueggemann. I'm with AT&T.
Odo.
My name is Odo Siganga. I'm the chair of the Computer Society of Kenya.
My name is Koura Fall. I'm a member of Senegalese IT Association. Also, I'm a MAG member. I'm from Senegal.
Okay, my name is Jameson Olufuye. I'm the CEO of Contemporary Consulting, the president of the Information Technology Industry Association of Nigeria, and the vice chairman for the World Information Technology and Services Alliance, responsible for Sub-Saharan Africa, and also one of the 5 global business representatives in the CSTD working group on IGF improvement. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Bert Kaliski. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at VeriSign.
My name is Grady Johnson. I work with the Association for Progressive Communications.
Thanks, everyone. We will be discussing how cloud computing relates to basic rights and how critical it is for human, social, and economic development, especially in the developing countries, and how we could make it achieve the goals. Cloud computing builds on the internet. Should we govern it? Not much different than the internet, basically hands-off. It's everyone's responsibility to make sure cloud computing does not increase risks to free speech and stays open to innovations, new ideas, and uses, unlike some of the Arab countries in the past few months. It should be free of intergovernmental controls or excess of rules and regulation, and free of censorship and other tools of political oppression, repression, hence leading to growth and development. How should cloud computing be implemented to lead to growth? The emergence of cloud computing as a paradigm for economic development presents opportunities for developing countries seeking to be engaged in world markets. It forces open the door to meet Millennium Development Goals. Analysts forecast ongoing growth for cloud computing, and telcos are snapping up cloud businesses at a rapid pace. Gartner forecasted that by the end of 2011, cloud-based services will account for almost a quarter of the overall hosting market, excluding co-location and mass market hosting. The 2010 Gartner Magic Quadrant study notes that it is the time for both great opportunities and great risks for the service providers in the cloud market. New entrants that previously lagged the market are altering the landscape of established data hosts and have been able to make bold investments in an attempt to catch up with more established providers. As had been said, cloud computing is a paradigm shift similar to the 20th century replacement of electric generators by electric grids, moving from where we used to buy it, maintain it, operate it, and pay for the diesel fuel, to where we subscribe and only pay for utilization. It is, I believe, more distributed across borders. Broadband, mobile, and fixed networking are available to many more participants. Cloud computing is quite convenient due to cheaper devices with low processing power and lower storage capacities, and holds great promises for customers and entrepreneurs in Africa and the developing and developed countries. Cloud computing offers small businesses a great competitive advantage. Small to medium businesses, the engine to economic development, are definite beneficiaries and must be encouraged to take advantage of cloud computing platforms and services. Human capacity is key. How do we build capacity in the developing countries? Higher education is one industry that already takes advantage of cloud computing. However, stability and trust inhibit collaboration of universities that are working together towards community cloud services. Students and professors in increasing numbers are working at colleges outside their country of origin. And outsourcing student email is quite common. Similar important benefits are possible and ready to be extended to other industries like health and financials. What implementable solutions could we identify for developing countries like the African countries to greatly benefit from this development, to improve their educational system, standard of living, and economies? Cloud computing is a pay-per-use or in-demand service that can be deployed in real time over the internet. It delivers services to the user without the concern for back-end software and hardware requirements, allowing the user to focus on the businesses and its results. Cloud computing is expected to enable small and medium businesses to enter the market with lower upfront cost to operate without a large IT department. It offers all users the opportunity for paying only for computing they use, reduce startups, their ability to scale up and down, and for innovators, it offers greatly reduced cost of entry. I've repeated in what I'm saying probably many of the things that have been said already in these types of events, but I didn't want to recreate some things. The lack of IT infrastructure in developing countries with the high cost of deploying a new infrastructure is an opportunity for cloud computing. This is becoming easier in Africa and other developing countries with the deployment of the undersea cables, mobile fixed and fiber telecom infrastructure that traverse the continents. For inter-African trade, many obstacles such as financial, whether they're local, regional, or international, tariffs, corruption, and infrastructure stand as inhibitors. Doesn't cloud computing provide an avenue of clear interstate relations that can encourage trade rather than inhibit it? The cloud seems to be the answer in providing emergent online services addressing cost, access, and diversity. Yet, the distributed nature of cloud computing raises several internet governance questions. Those questions become more urgent as a result and in response to risks, threats, and types of and degree of governance. We have all lived the young generation's infatuations with being connected and plugged in, and the popularity of many platforms. Young generations in developing countries are no different. They may even be more connected and plugged in than elsewhere in the world. Cloud computing's risks and challenges in internet governance related to data retention, privacy, security, geolocation, intellectual property rights, government and law enforcement cooperation, and transnational location issues. Just as cloud services offerings are gaining broad acceptance, incidents like the Amazon's recent web services outage have given greater credence to concerns about the reliability and security of cloud communication. In mid-April, as we all know, Amazon experienced a multi-day outage resulting from a manual configuration problem during a regular capacity upgrade in one of their data centers. But is this different than regular problems that we encounter in non-cloud computing environments? Or did it just sound bigger because it impacted users globally? And could it have been avoided with systemization? Transparency in this regard is key. Customers concerned about reliability might limit the damage from such outages by diversifying their cloud providers. And how could Africa deal with this? What used to be on a user's personal computer will be on a larger globally spread servers. This is great for information sharing and collaboration. But is it for privacy? Does online privacy and data security and sovereignty remain most important issues to consumers, businesses, and governments. Several questions are raised. Are the users in developing and African countries as concerned about access to the data, the location or the country where their data are stored, or should their main concern be security, not location? On the positive side, privacy is quickly becoming a marketing advantage that companies are going to assert on the internet and in cloud computing. And consumers and businesses should be able to select from a larger, more competitive group of providers. There is a lot of intellectual property around the world to care for. So how could copyright protection be implemented in the cloud and in developing countries? How will the young African generations look at issues like copyright and information ownership? How significant are the challenges of being cloud service provider and how to respond to law enforcement requests? How do we keep cloud computing from pushing developing countries' population towards becoming more consumers rather than producers? Many inhibitors could lead to slowing down economic growth. Finally, opinions vary on whether self-regulations, heavier-handed regulations, or government-enforced standards are best to achieve the objectives. Some believe that a real comprehensive regulatory system would allow companies to know what's permissible and what's not, and some others say that laws, acts, legislation with teeth are possible, and if companies are acting in good faith, why should they worry about regulations? A few questions here. Keeping in mind that the flexibility allows us to act more quickly, what works for Africa? Is self-regulation a strong enough policy to allow technologies to emerge and promote innovation, or are government directive and strong regulations required? How is Africa supposed to deal with privacy, confidentiality, intellectual property rights, the right to access information and to the internet? How are these issues affecting cloud computing usage by developing and African countries, and how do we stop it from stifling progress and economic growth in these countries? How do we encourage innovation and small and medium businesses to participate in the cloud computing businesses? And should governments in Africa and developing countries set binding legal standards? Thank you. It's a long introduction, but I thought I'd give you an overall view of cloud computing in general before we get into the questions. I ask Ambassador Verveer first. Allow me, what are the principal benefits and challenges of cloud computing for government agencies in the developing world? And how do you advise governments in Africa and the developing world should they deal with them? What could be learned from your experience in the US with other countries, especially like the bilateral discussions and agreements?
Well, let me begin by just very briefly mentioning in the United States we have initiated a policy that we call Cloud First for the federal government. This is a policy that our Chief Information Officer has promulgated to all government agencies, directing that they should make their first efforts in terms of data storage, data processing, to make use of cloud computing capabilities. And it is in the first approach at this, there is an estimated $20 billion of an overall $80 billion worth of services that will migrate to the cloud, we hope very, very quickly. Now there are, for us and for all administrations, including those in Africa, there are legitimate questions about the issue of whether or not there are certain kinds of information that ought not leave national borders. In the United States, we have made a very careful effort to tell our agencies that they need to categorize their information across three broad segments: low sensitivity, medium sensitivity, and high sensitivity. And the Chief Information Officer has directed that except for high sensitivity matters, there ought be no obligation to, on the part of U.S. government agencies, to store information exclusively within U.S. borders. In other words, we think that it is perfectly acceptable for information to be stored and to flow freely around the world, except for the most sensitive kinds of information that our agencies deal with. This, I think, is, in terms of one example we can hold out, maybe the most important one. It is that one needs to overcome the notion that either requirements with respect to citizen privacy or requirements with respect to government privacy require that there be only national storage and national processing. We hope that this example is one that all countries will take up because of the benefits of the cloud. Now, Mr. Chairman, you've given us a very good and thorough review of the advantages of the cloud, but I think it warrants underscoring perhaps two or three of these. Cloud computing, as with so many segments of the ICT sector, is one where the users are going to gain vastly more than the producers ultimately. The value of using ICT generally, but especially of using the cloud business models, the services available under the cloud, are going to produce incalculable value for the users. So we want to be sure that we don't do something to unnecessarily inhibit that in terms of government policies. And one of the most important government policies, one that has to be worked out between and among governments, is, as you mentioned, issues having to do with privacy. It is a value that in some dimension is universal, that human beings care about their privacy, and governments have arrangements to help individuals protect their privacy of all kinds. We have to be sure that we do not, as we protect that value, impose limitations that would prevent the efficient production and consumption of cloud services. We have to find a sensible balance with respect to that. And this is particularly the case with respect to the advantages that cloud services provide for small and medium-sized enterprises, which are precisely the ones these days that we count on for introducing innovation and we count on for increasing employment. So from the standpoint of development, which is obviously something of great interest here in Africa and around the world, the cloud services, assuming they're not unnecessarily inhibited, are going to offer wonderful advantages. And as I say, it's incumbent upon all governments not to impose policies that would unnecessarily inhibit the consumption of these services or the production of them for that matter.
Thank you. Jeff, from a telco operator's point of view and as a global operator with interest in developing countries and in Africa, how do you see the form of international cooperation, or what form of international cooperation on cybersecurity and law enforcement do you see necessary to push forward cloud computing in the region?
Thank you. That's a great question. And I think we see a lot of benefits to working within the existing structures that already exist for both cybersecurity and I would add law enforcement. I do think the issue of data becoming portable on a global basis is challenging law enforcement to develop new ways to work together. And I think as a private company, what we are trying to do is to support efforts that can both enhance law enforcement while avoiding things like the local storage as a reaction to say, if I don't feel like I can effectively perform a law enforcement investigation in a cloud environment, then my reaction may be to support a local storage requirement so I know I can get access to the data. So what we're trying to support are, let's find ways to get all of the benefits of cloud computing and allow the free flow of information while still acknowledging that we need to be able to cooperate on a global basis to do that. On cybersecurity, I think there's a lot of cooperation that's already happening at a technical level, and it's a question of even further strengthening the technical linkages, and you see that happening kind of at a local, regional, and global basis of CERTs trying to work with each other and the private sector trying to do everything we can to support that as well.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Jimson. Jimson, in one of your presentations, you mentioned that my advocacy is for a paradigm shift, and you're thinking of the premise of collective governance and responsibility. You mean the public government as PG1 on the one hand and the private government PG2, which is consisting of private stakeholders on the other hand, with both in seamless collaboration for the common good. How can IT organizations in Africa, and in Nigeria specifically, build confidence in cloud computing in order not only to leapfrog, but to, as you said, cheetah pole vault other countries? Keeping in mind what Ambassador Verveer said, that eventually there will be some expertise eventually that is needed in any country to maintain the sensitive information within its borders.
Thank you very much, our distinguished chair. Really, the old model of cloud computing is a model, it's a business model. I would say first and foremost is for Africa as a developing nation to be able to actually cheetah pivot. Perhaps I could explain what I mean by cheetah pivot. It has been leapfrogging, but we want to really cheetah pivot. We want to move very fast. Cheetah is the fastest animal and pivot, so moving beyond leapfrogging. And the cloud is a model that we see can make that happen, especially within the framework of WSIS 2015, action lines, targets for schools, for hospitals, for businesses to be conducted online, and for everyone to be connected. So I said, indeed, the government, the public sector, and also government in the private sector must work together in Africa. Peter told, if government, that is the public sector, doesn't move, nothing moves, in Africa. At least I know about Nigeria. If government doesn't move, nothing really moves. So, for example, we've been on advocacy for the IT industry to be clustered and for us to have a very focused direction. We've been talking about this for about 20 years. But it was just of late that the government took that up, and we have one Ministry of Communication Technology that is coordinating ICT issues in Nigeria, and we have seen the moves that have been made by the government, and we are quite happy about it. So really, every stakeholder must be involved. The current model at the international level, even at IGF, is very instructional. Multi-stakeholder, where you have the business, the tech community, the civil society, and government sitting together in the same equal footing and discussing issues that pertain to development and economic development for that matter. So that is what we are pushing. And in my capacity as the vice chair for WITSA, responsible for Africa, I want to really make this more pronounced, for all developing nation government, and Africa in particular, that must bring in all stakeholders. There should be no issue of, we are the boss, we are the one that won the election, so we must rule, and all these things like that. If we're interested in creating jobs, because there are so many unemployed youths in our society today, and we need to create millions of jobs, and it's ICT that can make that happen, and cloud, being a beautiful business model, can make that happen. And for that to be effectively done, as an industry association, we have been involved in awareness campaign. There are a number of events we organized. We had one in June in one of the states in Nigeria. We take it to the interior, okay, to not just federal, but at the state level or provincial level. So we tend to sensitize the policymakers, because many really, they are not even aware of what we mean by cloud computing. Even though the number of them will have been benefiting from the services of cloud computing, if you ask them, we don't know. It has not arrived in Nigeria yet. But when we're going to build the awareness, we begin to know what it actually means. And government, they want to put resources on building their own new infrastructure, like data centers. But when I say, this is available, we can actually use this. So they say, oh, really? So this is available, we can actually use this. Oh, yeah. But at the same time, we need to build confidence. You see, IT association like us, we also go into that advocacy. There's need to build confidence on the use. For those that are aware, they wonder, how come that Amazon is hacked? How come U.S. State Department, all these WikiLeaks, all this is happening? That means our data will not be saved. So we are in a kind of challenge again. Say, oh, we are working on it. It is safe, and these are things that need to be done. So really, we need to also address the issue of confidence in the use of cloud computing for developing nations. And we need to do that fast. We are in that process. Business community must invest in awareness projects. They must invest in SAT, in developing nations, because that is the weak point. And we need to ensure that fundings are freed up for other sectors. While cloud is there, you can use it cheap, really, cost benefit, you know. So instead of putting a lot of resources into it again, to building their own infrastructure and whatever from ground up, so we can use that and now deploy some of these resources, you know, for other urgent needs of the society. So what we know is it will work under the framework of public government and private government working together for us sitting on the right table to evolve right strategy on the use of cloud computing. Thank you.
Thanks, Jimson. Bert, innovation is key to progress and advancement. How could it be encouraged through spreading cloud computing in Africa and engaging the minds in social economic development? Human capacity is key in that regard, and how do we achieve capacity building for Africa?
Well, one of the great things about cloud computing and about what the internet brings us is community that goes beyond borders. In fact, as we are experiencing with the remote participants in this very event, you put many minds together, different parts of the world, different experiences, different problems, and they can do so much more. The talent that's gathered here and represented in Africa and in other parts of the world have unique ways of working together. Two directions where this can happen in terms of cloud computing. On the one hand, cloud computing gives an opportunity for people in any part of the world to help contribute their ideas to solving problems in any other part. Secondly, when people have solutions that they'd like to offer, they have an instant global market for those solutions as cloud services. So in both ways, it's important to enable that free flow of ideas and services through cloud computing.
Thanks. Wado, as part of your contribution in the IGF to 2010, you've emphasized that the data privacy and security issues should be addressed correctly in order to promote the adoption of cloud computing. Jimson talked a little bit about confidence and building confidence, and a part of building confidence would be addressing these issues. How do you think the African countries could deal with the issues of privacy, confidentiality, intellectual property rights, and security to allow both the usage of cloud computing and the hosting of cloud computing, all in an effort to meet regional development needs and objectives?
Thank you, Chair. I think your question is directed to the African countries, but I think one thing I need to emphasize right at the onset is that it is very important for the African countries to work together with the international community in meeting the challenges of the cloud in those areas that you've mentioned: security, privacy, and copyright protection. The reason is the cloud, just like the internet in general, has basically broken down geographic and political boundaries. And the challenges that have been introduced cannot be resolved simply by perhaps using historical jurisdictional contexts, but must be done by an international resolve and an international togetherness of all countries. And the other thing is that apart from involving an international effort, the effort should also involve all stakeholders. So that is not just governments, but also the civil society and the business community, as well as the technical community. I think a forum like the IGF offers a good foundation for this kind of work, where countries can work together, and also the multi-stakeholder model can be brought to discuss and perhaps find solutions to these issues of security, privacy, and copyright protection. The other thing, I think I would also emphasize what my colleagues have said, Jimson and others, this issue of perhaps bringing confidence to the users is very important, and this can be brought about through a program of awareness and education about the cloud and what the challenges are and what the potential and the possibilities are. I think it's also important within the African context that current laws, regulations, and even policies pertaining to the things like copyright, data protection, privacy, I think they need to be kind of looked at, a second look, so that they can be updated and strengthened to take into account operating within an environment of cloud computing. I know in many of the African countries, some of the laws are fairly archaic, and some of the issues that could arise from using the cloud computing perhaps may not be addressable within those jurisdictions with regard to cloud computing. So the laws, policies, regulations will have to be updated. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Now, Robert, what must be done to make people feel better and alleviate their concerns about internet and cloud computing freedom in general in Africa? And how would you think you could participate as an organization in doing that?
So first, thank you. And I think, in regards to civil society, I think, first of all, is ensuring that the rules of the road and the legal enabling environment for Africa actually promotes a safe use of cloud computing. That's key. What my organization and many others have done is really to try to assess what is the legal enabling environment so that we have enough access, that centers can be closer, connection points, the typical infrastructure things are key. But I think the other things, and some of the other panelists kind of mentioned this, is making sure that then the cybersecurity issues, the protections of rights, whether some of the countries are actually going to be able to protect the data, not just of the users, but also of companies and others as well. And I would say that in many cases, civil society and NGOs face a lot of the resource constraints that small and medium business face as well. It's not their primary responsibility. They just assume that they can use the service and count for it to be up and the data to stay there. The big issue is a lot of NGOs work in a variety of different things. Some of them, and this content particularly, work in documenting human rights and work in documenting issues of corruption. For them, the issue of trust is even more important, and of cybersecurity, that data be out of harm's way, and that they can use technologies like encryption and others that banks and others need as well to keep that data safe. And so a lot of times they may choose not to use a cloud service that's based in Africa, but one in another jurisdiction that can provide protection. So I would say that an enabling environment of privacy and safety and security is key. Education of best practices. And the other issue for NGOs to participate is the cost issue. Because if it's a service that's a paid service, it is a sector that's usually keen to get things at low or little cost, and when that happens, maybe not all the features are enabled. And so the cloud providers turning on some of the features by default and privacy by default, I think would be a key thing. And so it is a vulnerable sector, but I think if they can have the security issues dealt with, it will help them, and it will help other business sector users of cloud computing as well, and the continent as a whole will be better for it.
Thanks a lot, Robert. Cora, you called for a baseline study of the cloud in Africa and a task force to develop strategies for its use. Here we are today. From a year ago, did you see that this issue has been well addressed? The cloud computing train has taken off. Users are already using it. Any change in perspective? And where do you see the role of IT associations in Africa in general and Senegal in particular to speed up the adoption of cloud computing while taking care of major issues such as privacy, security, and intellectual property rights?
Thank you, Chairman. I will speak in English like French-speaking people, but I think it will be okay. So as you said, the cloud is a new, innovative, and complex concept for Africa. And as you said in your presentation, it's a big step ahead of conventional computing in a continent where most of the people cannot access or take full advantages of existing system they're using because of the lack of expertise. We have some studies, but not specific one about the cloud in Africa. So we need to do more specific studies or research within the region, because each region, specifically in Africa, we have own issues like access to infrastructure or access to information. But the studies that we should have would give us output that help organizations or government to have more confidence in cloud. That's what my colleague said. We have to build first confidence at the government or the policymaker level. And after that, about the role of the IT association in Africa, it's clear that they have a role to play for that. But it's one step at a time, like as advised by an article of Balancing Act. Cloud in Africa can start like messaging in cloud, like first having yahoo.sn or google.ci for Ivory Coast. And the IT association also have to support innovation to help the cloud to be to be involved in Africa. And the IT African specialists, like developers, before this session, we have a session with FOSFA, the open source foundation. So the specialists, like a developer, could develop software using open source tools to offer this kind of services. And the kind of standard that exists in developed countries must be the same that work in data centers in Africa, for example. At another level, like government and organization, suitable contractual framework is necessary to prevent risk and allows company or user to migrate most of their application on the cloud. So we have the issue of security to address.
Thanks, Gura. Grady, I'm going to ask the same question that I asked Robert for you, and then add another question to it. What should be done to make people feel better and alleviate their concerns about internet and cloud computing freedom in Africa? And as an organization, what would be the top priority items that you would like to see being avoided by governments in the region?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to give the perspective, as you mentioned, of NGOs and also in particular human rights defenders. I think it's clear that cloud has enormous potential, but there are hidden costs of cloud computing. And as was mentioned earlier, human rights defenders and NGOs are sometimes in very high-risk situations. And so, our concerns about security and privacy, you can multiply that by 100 times for someone operating in a high-risk situation. So first, the opportunities they're immense. The low-cost, scalable computing power and digital storage is very, very helpful for medium and small businesses, which is what NGOs happen to be. It also gives great advantage to people in high-risk situations. You can securely store your information off-site. I have colleagues of mine have had their computers and their phones seized. The information on there, it may have been secure, when it was in their possession, but it is now, in the hands of authorities or other actors. But data in the cloud is safe from that kind of seizure. There are, however, like I mentioned, the hidden costs of cloud computing. Something that is just sort of assumed is that broadband is widely available. These cloud services, they're designed by companies operating in usually rich countries with lots of connectivity. They presuppose reliable high-speed connections, and for many people in the developing world, that is not the case. Most Africans are subject to data caps, doubly so for people operating in internet cafes who are, predominantly the poor. It is often also prohibitively expensive to get broadband, especially in rural areas. And so all these potentials of cloud also carry the potential of exacerbating existing social inequalities due to uneven development. And it's not even just the raw speed of the connection that is an obstacle. There are, the issues of dropped connections, packet loss, and low latency. They are endemic, and they make using cloud services very, very difficult and unreliable. Naturally, there are, of course, the risks to human rights defenders. They're naturally very skeptical of putting sensitive information and entrusting it to third parties. There are questions of how well is this information secured, under what circumstances will it be surrendered to authorities, and the other issue is, of course, information stored online is always exposed. If I keep information on a hard drive disconnected from the net, a hacker cannot penetrate that, no matter how skilled they are. If it's kept in a service like Dropbox, it is always at risk. And of course, encryption is very, very strong. We have great technology in encryption, but I hesitate to be crass here, but there's a well-known technique called rubber hose decryption, which is, you may be able to piece that together. The other issue, finally, with storing information in the cloud is data redundancy. A human rights defender, we want to be able to be assured that when we delete information, that it actually is erased. If it's kept on a cloud server, it might be kept in a couple different locations. We may not ever have assurance that it is ever gone. Examples of some of these problems are, Dropbox just this year, a major security flaw was identified. Hackers could very easily penetrate into your Dropbox network and have access to all the files stored there. And Dropbox does not even keep a record of when files are accessed or by who or where they're from. And so you wouldn't even be aware that all of the files on there are open to the public. So I want to talk a little bit about this, the solutions and best practices. What Google has with the transparency report, that's very, very helpful, telling you what they know, how it's accessed, when it's accessed. Gmail is a favorite of human rights defenders and NGOs because it is encrypted end-to-end. And a colloquial example, if you guys have seen the movie Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the way that those two characters communicated securely is through a Gmail account. Because when you use a service, Gmail is a cloud service. When you use a service like that, all that a watchdog can see is that you logged on to Gmail and that your colleague logged on to Gmail. But it should be noted that recently Gmail itself was hacked. Even some of the most secure services are not that secure. Solutions, we need to address the uneven development problems. We need concerted efforts to roll out high-speed connectivity, especially to rural areas. That's where a lot of these services are most needed. And we need to do this so that we don't leave the poorest people behind. We also need, as was mentioned in the Google workshop on cloud computing, transparency around data requests. We need to know the jurisdiction in which our data is stored so we know the legal framework about how it's accessed. And we need very clearly outlined policies around the data security and honesty about when data is compromised. Finally, if there are advantages for businesses. There is a market niche for services directed toward highly sensitive data. As was mentioned earlier, this is how a lot of cloud services are seeking to distinguish themselves. And we think that's a very, very valuable service, and that would really help in encouraging further adoption. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks. Well, before I open it to the floor and the remote people, I have a question to everyone. Anybody, any volunteer is fine. Where do you think Africa today could play in cloud computing? Is there any specific area where we could say it's safe? Yes, it could be done. This country or this specific subject or this specific service? Please go ahead, Robert.
I'll say two things. In regards to, Freedom House did our report on internet freedom. We didn't cover the whole continent, but we did cover Kenya and South Africa and Nigeria. And one thing that we've seen in our report, and we've seen in the statements and the stories that have been shared over the last few days at IGF, is being able to find technology and solutions that are appropriate for the content. There's great innovation in this continent. The amount of technology and innovation around mobile is incredible, and I think Africa could could work on finding appropriate cloud services that would be available on mobile. I think, yes, we have in many parts of the world great amounts of bandwidth, but that's because we have it and we can use it. If the platform here is mobile, then it's making sure the legal regulatory environment allows for 3 and 4G, but that's how it can get into the communities, and that it can be low cost. So I think that would be a great potential. The great fear, I think, is that countries not be afraid. It's going to require a lot of education. It's going to require a lot of best practices. And given that it will be something new, I think it's also something that can be exported to the rest of the world. So business, civil society, and others all have to come together to make it happen. And it's happened here in Kenya with other things, and I think it's a great potential. And so I think that's where there can be some innovation. And Ushahidi, which is a crowdsourced reporting system, came out of Kenya. The same could be done for other type of services.
Yeah, I concur. I think that there's enormous potential in the mobile telephony for cloud computing, and unfortunately, having an extensive 3G, 4G network might be a little ahead of ourselves. But perhaps one area would be to develop cloud services that are designed less around having all the bells and whistles of functionality and more around working with low connectivity, still being effective, and for people who will be using phones instead of computers.
Wodo, and then Jeff.
Thank you. I think I agree on 2 points. The first one, what my colleagues have already said about the focus for Africa should be on mobile broadband connectivity. At least in Kenya, we have 3G. We have also upcoming 4G that's available even in the rural areas. So I think that will be a focus area for the delivery of the cloud service. And then the second thing, the innovation I would like to see in Africa is in the area of the services that are available in the cloud, because a lot of the population is within the rural areas. I think we need to have some focus, particularly to give access to government services through the cloud, local authority services, even legal services, marketing services. A lot of people in the rural areas are, for example, farmers. They would like to know where the markets are for their produce. Other agricultural services, including, for example, where they can buy inputs and at what cost. The usual things like health services are very important to be available as services on the cloud. Weather information, transport services, and another very important one is e-learning. E-learning for schools, that's crucial. For that service should be available for Africa in the cloud. Thank you.
Thanks. I would reiterate what Wado just said. I think there's an enormous opportunity to also use these new applications for cloud, and the innovation that Kenya has and Africa has shown, it sometimes leads the way to also promote adoption of broadband, and as you develop healthcare and education type applications, they can be delivered over mobile, and you can develop scalable solutions that can start with very low bandwidth. Even our consumer email is all cloud-based, right? So there are a lot of different variations of cloud services. At the same time, as you start to build your fiber infrastructure, you can take advantage of cloud for e-government, and we deliver very high security healthcare exchange information on a cloud architecture. So there are many different variations of cloud that can be used, from very innovative low-cost consumer services to very secure but very cost-efficient, high-end cloud services that can really help for e-gov and those types of things, where the government can help be a leader in the adoption, as Ambassador Rivera mentioned the U.S. is starting to do.
Jimson?
Actually, the ambassador mentioned the need for the enabling environment, policy, right policy framework. I think that's just what we need. Africa is a huge, potential, has huge potential for cloud computing. Of course, I believe you know about Nigeria, when they got the policy right for telecom, and everything, the statistics went up. So with regard to cloud services also, from business, I know of my CEOs that want government to come up with policy and legislation, for tax holidays or for protection of data and legal status of electronic evidence that be tenable in court of law, so things that could protect the business, basically. So I think this is the message, for us in developing a nation, particularly for government, need to make the right atmosphere to be available. Even though in some areas we have poor infrastructure, like looking at Kenya is good, 24/7 power, so to speak. Well, of course, about Nigeria, we have it's a generator-powered economy. But notwithstanding, once the right policy framework is there, it will really work. In fact, we have a number of cloud infrastructure already in place, even from government perspective. And we have somebody in the government that is here, maybe you can intervene to throw more light on how they are doing it, because I know about that public infrastructure, the government infrastructure. But the opportunity is still much there. Very soon, we'll start mobile banking. Very soon, the mobile banking, the framework is in place from the Central Bank of Nigeria. And of course, e-learning solution will begin to roll out. But businesses want to be able to do much more if we have the right environment. And that is one point Ambassador made, and which is very important for us to really cheat up over it. With regard to deploying cloud computing services, even in Africa. And I believe a number of companies here, multinational, want to come in and invest, right? Right? Go. So, so you just need the right framework. So that's it. Thank you.
We heard a lot about mobile and telecommunication, etc. But the problem remains, at least one I see, is the issue of content and customization and things of that nature. What could we do to push that through? How could we do it faster? Capacity building is a major issue. How do we help with it? How do we pursue it?
I think one idea is we have seen that with the advent of mobile and with cloud, you really have a platform for innovative developers to use this as a low-cost way to enter the market. And I think one way that Africa could really spur this is to enable and open up these platforms to innovation. I know companies like AT&T, we have an online developer program that anyone in the world, in fact, the new Nigerian ministry came up and asked about it. And these are opportunities that are not just, they can be used to develop solutions that are innovative here, and they can also be used to really become part of the global market for these apps. So I think that may be a way to both socialize what's happening, but also develop the kind of customized content that is going to be most relevant to the users here. Yeah.
We're going to move to questions. I have one person, a remote. Okay. Yeah, please go ahead. In the first row in the corner.
My name is Wael Khalil. I work at my day job with a hoster, a data center hosting company in Egypt, and we are hosting many services, and we're working to develop a cloud service. And I'm going to share what we found in not a research, but from our market, is that we do have local companies do have an opportunity in providing many things that are not provided by the major cloud providers, like localized services, using the local language, and localized applications that deal with the local issue. If I'm going to look for a finance system in the cloud, I'm most likely to find the tailored one done in Egypt, following the Egyptian laws and regulation, rather than use one in Amazon or in Google Apps. The other thing is local support, which is another important thing. Most of the cloud services available now depend a lot on companies, and IT within companies have a high level of expertise to set up a cloud service and access to it, and having local support, someone that you can call and a local number and answer you in your own language is an edge. And another thing is actually local availability. If you are hosted, and when I'm talking about cloud services, not software that is developed on the major cloud provider like Amazon or Google Apps, but that is hosted locally, because then we have a chance to cut from our cost to the rather expensive international connectivity and access prices. There is a couple of challenges that we see. First is competition from the big cloud providers. What we don't want to have is the Microsofts and the Googles and the Amazons setting up local shops and asking local providers to as a white label reseller. Which is a challenge, because it will leave us without developing the local resources and having the content and the infrastructure locally. The second thing is actually availability, with issues with cuts in power and in connectivity. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Liz?
Yes, we have a question from the remote participants, and I think it might be related. It's from the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, and the comment addressed to any of the companies on the panel. There should be a commitment from some of the larger global players in cloud services to bring the infrastructure closer to the markets they serve in order to help develop the local or regional infrastructure and capacity in developing countries.
Thank you. Anyone would like to take it? Jeff?
Yeah, I would just say I think the best way to do that is to allow the global companies that have global data needs to be able to easily transfer data to and from areas like Africa, because then we will be able to provision the infrastructure, and that will follow. So I think I would take it back to one of Ambassador Verveer's points, which is that the ability to do cross-border data flows is going to, there may be an initial inclination that that's going to lead to the infrastructure being centralized somewhere. It really is not that way, because for quality of service and other reasons, you will distribute it, but you need to have the flexibility to allow that to happen.
And if I might add a comment to the gentleman's first question, cloud is a deployment model. It's not a location. And cloud interfaces are the same regardless where the services are hosted. Isn't that the same as the internet already works for us? When you make a local request or a global request on the internet, you send email to someone and their server is in a data center down the street or it's across an ocean. Same protocols. So the first building block in cloud is the interoperable protocols for interfacing with the services. The second part, I think per earlier comments, is having some confidence that those services are doing what you're actually asking them to do. Once you have that platform in place for confident interaction with cloud services, then it's everyone's market to contribute the best content and the best services adapted to the particular needs.
Okay, we have a question here and then there. First here, please state your name, organization you're with, and if you have a specific person you're asking the question, you're addressing the question to.
I don't have a question, actually I have a comment. My name is Karel Novotnys and I'm from APC. I want to react on a couple of comments that were directed towards mobile phone, bringing connectivity to Africa. and that way allowing Africans using, kind of harnessing the potential of cloud services. And I think one risk has not been mentioned here at all, and I think it's quite a big risk, that particularly internet used through mobile phones is very often locked to specific services. If you buy an Android phone, you're already locked to, your internet usage is already locked to about 10 cloud services, specific cloud services. So it means that both phone manufacturers as well as the operators very often provide internet in such a way that that it's not open internet. In fact, it's being specifically locked to specific services, which is very dangerous development from APC's perspective. Well, Google representative is going to speak after me, so that's quite...
Please go ahead, Google representative.
Hello, Pedro Lesandrade, Senior Policy Counsel at Google. Just to give some an answer to the APC question as well, I think that also on top of what Jeff just mentioned, that it's very important to have a well-developed framework of free flow of information, and also keep in mind the different regulations in terms of privacy that needs to be adapted to the current realities of internet. I think that also a good practice, and I think that Kenya is an example here, is interconnection. So foster the creation of network access points, and also put intelligence of the internet at the edges. So start to put the content closer also to the user. So with using many tools that helps to get a better service in a local way, or for example, use more local traffic rather than international traffic to make the connections cheaper. So this, I think that is also, and Kenya has been doing great progress on this with their network access point. Thank you. Oh, in terms of your comment on Android, well, we developed the platform, then we lose control on what usually the manufacturers or the operators do with the operating system. It's, you know, the benefits of having an open platform is that then you can program what in the way that you want it to provide certain services. For us, it will be great if it's as open as possible.
Robert?
I think I didn't mention maybe one of the assumptions that we have, and this is going to your question. I think interoperability you're mentioning is key, and I think everyone would agree with that. I would also say going forward, open standards, and the standards actually stay in a format that it's accessible to everyone, and so innovators and entrepreneurs can actually build on what's publicly available, and not standards where access to that information is incredibly expensive or not. So a really decentralized learning ability, and I would say that the responsibility of the different stakeholders, which is what IGF is about, is to have this enabling environment. What do we need? And we need to make sure that the skills, the legal environment is there. I would say that the education, and so the companies and the government work together. Initiatives that many governments have done to try to bring developers and different folks together to try to build or create an entrepreneurial environment around technology, and I think is particularly important. Some countries have done that, others have not, but it's possible everywhere on the continent.
I have a question for Ambassador Verveer. How do you feel about creating possibly some cloud computing centers of excellence in areas like Africa and other parts of the world, and helping that type of activity go on?
Well, in general, I think my own view, personal view, is this, that if in fact we have an enabling environment, we're going to see opportunities genuinely flourish in Africa and elsewhere around the world. And the reason for that is partly the inherent aspects of the cloud that do make available to everyone at lease rates, and frankly also I think in a pretty competitive environment, it appears, so the prices are likely to be competitive. makes available to everyone state-of-the-art computing capabilities. This is, seems to me to be the sort of thing that then creates a kind of virtuous cycle. Now, inherent in the internet is the truly wonderful, genuinely marvelous feature that it contributes enormously to collective learning, to collective wisdom. So the notion of centers of excellence having a kind of geographic location may be something that's genuinely not necessary in this environment. If we get the fundamentals right, if we get the sort of rule of law right, if we are careful not to leave unnecessary obstacles in the path of this, I genuinely think that we'll see basically everyone in the world in a position to share significantly in the kinds of opportunities that cloud computing provides us.
Okay, my question was in that regard, but one of the reasons for it is the fact that capacity building and having the expertise in different parts of the world helps get the people, the countries to become producers rather than just consumers of the technology. Let's see how it goes. Please.
Thank you, Pierre Dangino, Strategic Consulting Group from Benin. There was mention of the policy framework in some of the presentations, and I think apart from the US, I haven't seen much policy framework from other places, but okay, I would like the panelists eventually to enlighten us on that. And I'm particularly interested in the regulatory framework, actually. That. So, oh, I'm sorry. I was saying that I'm just interested in the the policy framework that there was mention of that, and that concretely we could be seeing examples of such, policy frameworks. And then I was also mentioning that apart from the one of the US, at least the federal policy, I haven't seen much. So, but of course, I would like the panelists to actually enlighten us whatever exists, so that in places we do not reinvent the wheel. The other thing, and you just alluded to it, Mr. Chair, it's the issue of, okay, we saw the demand side, okay, we say e-health or whatever that's possible in Africa, mobile apps, that's fine. But the business in Africa, so can anyone also tell us exactly, concretely, what does it take to start cloud computing business in Africa, for instance?
Okay. I can mention real quick, I know the European Commission actually has a cloud initiative proceeding underway, and they are seeking public comments and are looking to develop, I think, a strategy paper this fall. And also, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, has been working on done a lot of work on a privacy framework for cross-border data transfers that I think is being driven by the desire to really enable the types of cloud services that we're talking about. And just 2 weeks ago, ratified a set of kind of implementation plan for that. So we see a lot of progress being made there as well. So, yeah.
Jimson?
Well, maybe in addition to that, specifically on, say, IT policy, the number of countries in Africa that have IT policy, like Nigeria, for example, we can meet later, give you the reference to the web. In fact, right now we're trying to aggregate the telecom and IT policy that will also enable cloud activity. In fact, as I said earlier, when it comes to developing businesses, you just need the right environment. As a businessman, I just need the right environment to be able to put my money to invest. Then with regard to how do we start it? In fact, that's a very good question. I will encourage you to be, I don't know if you are in the private sector or in the public sector. Okay, yes, yeah, you're in the private sector. So you should join in the ICT Association in Benin, and with that, they'll be able to give you more details and more information. There are a number of, for example, in Nigeria, which I'm the president, we have a lot of we have a lot of fora where we have events We talk about, we have workshops where we look at case studies and how to begin a number of those businesses. It's very easy to know to do. In fact, cloud computing is a business model that provides that platform for you to just get running once you have the right skills. And talking about the last question about Center of Excellence, I still think it's relevant, especially in the developing nation, to build capacity in terms of skills, skills level. In Nigeria, we have an institute called Digital Bridge Institute, wherein there is a training on web development, on fiber optics, laying of fibers, and what have you. So, and a number of colleagues, my members, they're also into training. We do training. So you need to join in an association. If there is none, please see me at the end so we can get something going.
Liz, remote participation?
Sure, we just had a response back from the Caribbean Telecommunications Union. I want to thank the panelists for their responses. They should be mindful, however, that here in the Caribbean, where there are very few IXPs and domestic traffic is still being routed through the USA, Miami, in many cases, these larger companies should play an advocacy role and help to encourage the development of these facilities by their commitment to bring these services closer to the markets, enhancing quality of service, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think there any comment on. Sorry, please.
My name is Rina Weber. I'm working for OECD, and we are also currently undertaking studies on cloud computing. I would have two questions. The first one, I mean, you have two fundamental requirements for cloud computing. One was mentioned, so you need connectivity. The other requirement, though, is power, availability of electricity. So I was wondering whether you in your African policy frameworks, you deal with that issue. I mean, how to power those mobile devices, especially in rural areas, because we see that this could be a major issue for the development of cloud computing. My second question relates to the development of cloud infrastructure in Africa, because, I mean, it was mentioned several times, most of the cloud providers are currently located in the US, or at least in the Northern Hemisphere, and it would be much better for African countries if you would have your cloud providers located in Africa. So are there any government initiatives underway, or is the private sector, well, basically establishing data centers in that area?
Thanks a lot, Rina. Wadu? I don't know, probably Grady.
Maybe I can just comment on the first question about power being a necessary condition for broadband availability in the rural areas. I would rather think that perhaps the most important preconditions for the cloud to be available in the rural areas is, first of all, just the access, and then number two, the broadband. The power issue, I think, it's really reduced, it's really mitigated when we now talk about mobile broadband. The reason is already we have a lot of people in Africa, particularly in Kenya, who have the phones that are able to access the internet at least up to the 3G level. They're already there. They're using them for other services, not just for internet. They're using them for voicemail, for SMS, and etc. So there are already established ways of charging these phones to the extent that the power problem actually is or hardly could be taken as a problem. There are centralized areas, for example, in the village markets, where you can charge your phone if necessary. And also charging a phone is very easy compared to other access methodologies like computers, because you can use even the solar energy. So from what I've seen, particularly in our country here in Kenya, the power element, once you are talking about mobile broadband, is really, really mitigated.
In addition, with the fact that processing is being taken off the telephones in general, it makes it require much less power. Grady, concerning the question about locating some of the the centers in Africa instead of having it outside.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question, and I think that really we need to focus on the concept that cloud providers will follow the market. If there is a market there, businesses will open up, and local businesses tailored to local needs. The The real issue we need to address is the pricing mechanisms. A high-speed connection in rural Brazil costs 5 times more than it does in London. You just cannot have a user base with these kind of prohibitive costs. So governments need to realize that there are exponential gains to investment in this kind of infrastructure. And once the infrastructure is there, businesses will naturally pop up to feed this demand that has appeared. Right.
Dan, please.
Dan O'Neill with GIIC. Just in terms of kind of following up on that, but in terms of business following that marketplace, but then don't we also need to have government provide a legal structure that is going to enable businesses to want to set up there and to be able to function successfully there?
Okay, just to underscore what Waldo said concerning power, about 10 years ago, it said that telecom business will not thrive in Nigeria because of power challenge, but we switched to generator. So, and obviously the success recorded is based on the generator supply. So, but notwithstanding, the government has taken this as a major priority to ensure adequate provision of power and 24/7. In fact, that is number 1 on Nigerian government agenda right now. And once that is done, it will be able to enable more businesses. But you're right, Dan, it still boils down to a policy framework and the environment, good environment, and we will always find solution to power problem.
Garland?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention there's 2 aspects of this, and particularly if there's one, obviously the transponder towers for your wireless and charging your phones, but the largest users of electricity in the Northern Virginia area are the NOCs. They call them Network Operation Centers. And if you've ever been to one, if you're talking about cloud computing, you have to talk about cloud computing, all right? These centers are just absolute gobblers of electricity. I mean, they drive the power companies wild. In fact, they have to go off. They call them up and have them go offline on these peak times. They have to turn on these huge. They've got 4 of them that'll fill up this room of these diesel generators that come online to anyway. Enormous requirements on electricity, cheap electricity to drive the centers of your cloud computing, and huge investments. And they have to, and you also you got to go to one of these things. I take trips to these things all the time, and it's also because you have to have all of this security and redundancy. You go into one pod and there's $200 million worth of, and you realize that there's like 3 other pods over here and 2 other, and they're all just running like mad because if you can't go down for 1 millisecond. So it's a huge investment, huge amount of power, and that's why they're all sitting where they're sitting. All right. So I don't want anybody to think this is. It's serious commitment, serious money, serious, so anyway.
Okay, we're going to go to Robert and then Jeff, and since we only have 5 minutes left, if there are no other questions, I will leave it to the panelists, to each one of you make a comment, if any, or statement before we close for the evening. Robert?
I'll just go quickly. Something that I think industry best practices and striving towards a goal of energy efficiency. Some of the cloud providers have either tried to miniaturize the cloud services or publish how they reduce power usage, and also to be green as well too, because they consume energy, but they consume and create all sorts of things. So I think that is something that maybe at the existing cloud providers could work together, maybe encouraged by certain jurisdictions that are keen to do that, and I think would be helpful. So I think that's something that Africa not necessarily can innovate on, but innovations abroad and bringing them here and seeing. But power, as you were mentioning, not just is going to be a huge issue, and maybe a more decentralized model that doesn't necessarily require one NOC, but maybe something that will allow for several NOCs that are together to have some sort of redundancy would be good. Maybe it's a model that doesn't exist yet, and maybe something that can be created.
Well, actually, I was going to pick up on that point. Cloud computing is very energy efficient compared, if we assume that data storage and transfers are going to go through the roof anyway, cloud computing is a much more energy efficient way to do it, because instead of 5 companies having utilized data storage at 40%, you can efficiently do that on a shared architecture. The other point is it's much more flexible for dealing with power issues because you can have redundancy, and if you have to turn off some centers or you have problems, you can easily shift and have the data somewhere else. So maybe there are unique architectural considerations that Africa raises that would be able to harness some of the flexibility of cloud. I mean, the way I think about it is you've kind of got the ultimate ability to take the shared resources and reallocate them as needed on a dynamic basis. You know, there are a lot of unique issues here where that may be a very appropriate solution.
Sure. I would just like to reiterate that the concern that is often overlooked is that this cloud computing has tremendous potential, but it is not a given that everyone will have access to this resource. We need to make sure that access is much more distributed, make sure that it isn't something that's limited just to people who right now have broadband access. It's a very small portion of the population in many countries, and you will actually be, like I said, exacerbating already problematic inequalities, and so leaving a lot of people behind by adopting cloud.
Bert?
There was a discussion earlier about centers of excellence, and let me offer a different phrase for that: networks of excellence. Connecting people together, we do find benefit in being in the same room or the same facility sometimes, but we take what we've learned here and bring it into our larger network. And isn't the cloud the same way? You can have huge centers, as the commenter just indicated. You can have distributed networks of smaller centers, and the ability to move back and forth, which all seems so important. But I believe Africa, in particular, is in a unique position for a sunrise in the clouds.
Yeah, actually making cloud computing successful in the developing world, particularly in Africa, actually is a two-way traffic solution from the business and then the government. I think it tilts more to the government because they set the policy. And, but the business community, we have to also engage the associations, have to be more involved in advocacy, in awareness creation, and in promoting this brilliant business model that will create more wealth, create more opportunity, bring in the win-win solution, for us in terms of growing the bottom line. And also, the parliamentarians, they have to come in because they have to be involved in the legislation. So the awareness, the business should also take it to the parliament in Africa, find a way of connecting with the parliamentarians and engaging them in the subject matter. So with that, I believe cloud will be successful and will be able to attain the Vision 2015 target and even do much more beyond that. I believe, based on statistics available, internet penetration in Africa, though it's about 5.9%, and in Nigeria in particular, it's about 30%. So when it was first zero to 30%. So I think with right policy, we can really make it successful.
Cora?
Okay, as I said in Vilnius, the issues about cloud, like security or privacy, is our responsibility in Africa. We have to define a strategy, a multi-stakeholder strategy involving private sector, government, civil society, to uphold the rights in cloud, like internet rights and principle. That's to build the confidence for cloud in Africa. So an open network of individuals, organizations can work to ensure that the cloud operates in ways that fulfill rights like accessibility, equal and secure access, security, and all that. And the network of individuals and organizations have to develop a specific strategy, Africa strategy for the use of cloud, define the local policy and regulatory framework, the implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of the defined strategy, and address the issue of awareness and capacity building for the user.
Just to wrap up, I would like to perhaps say that, in my view, for Africa to really be, or the developing world to be successful in the cloud computing environment, we need to focus on two main things. The first thing is the access should be mobile broadband. We really need to focus on that because we are really dealing with most of the people being in the rural areas, and with the mobile broadband, you have the advantages, first of all, of cheaper costs. It's much cheaper for the people to access because they already have the mobile phones that are already cheaper than computers. If you are to have another access methodologies, it will be computers, which is more expensive. The mobile phones also do not require to use proprietary software. There were colleagues here who were talking about the operating systems. We don't need to have proprietary operating software that will be an extra cost for the users. Then also they do not require mains power. It's not a necessary condition to have mains power like most computers require that. The mobile phones are also portable. People can move around with them because in Africa, in the rural areas, most of people don't sit in one location like in an office. They are moving around doing their daily tasks. So that's a better methodology for access. Also, they do not require specialized training to use. People already know how to use them because they have been using them for other functionalities. So it's very important to focus on the mobile broadband if we want the access to be there in the rural areas. The second thing is we need to focus on content. I've had a lot of talk here about maybe trying to bring some of the infrastructure closer to the people and this kind of thing. But in my own view, I think we can get the best out of cloud computing by concentrating on developing relevant content for our people rather than trying to do something where we might not have the economies of scale or even the comparative advantage. So as long as we have the connectivity through the fiber optic, the marine fiber optics, and the land fiber optic within the country, I think it's important we concentrate on developing the content that can drive the demand for the cloud services within the countries.
Thank you. Ambassador?
Well, the opportunities that cloud computing presents for especially the creation of wealth, but also for much broader social and cultural contributions is enormous. And it's very important that we not lose opportunities to appropriate those kinds of gains. The one thing I'll offer is this. One of the things we are doing in the United States, as I mentioned, is we are taking advantage of the government as customer to try to advance the technologies, both in terms of providing business for cloud producers, but also in terms of providing an example for everyone in our society. And I think the use of the government's procurement activities throughout Africa is one of the things that ought to be carefully considered in terms of trying to help advance this very important business model.
I won't repeat with a lot that has been said. I'll maybe repeat something that I said from the start. I think there are perhaps particular groups, some civil society groups being some, but I would say some businesses that where if cloud services were in the region, it may not be at a level of security and privacy that's required, and having options is particularly important, and being able to still have choice. Just like the issues with CCTLDs and countries wanting to restrict that, I think choice should always be important, and I think education is going to play a key role for businesses to know how to choose between the different providers, what the value add is going to be for the regional or for the national ones, and innovation is key as well.
Thank you. I also, a lot has been said already. I would reiterate the importance of infrastructure. I do think cloud is scalable, and you can have mobile broadband be a great facilitator of cloud, but usage is going to go through the roof, and we're seeing that on our network. And the amount of capacity just from the usage, you need that infrastructure. Second, on the trust framework and the issues of the privacy and security, I would just point out that it needs to be flexible, because you don't want to take away choice in trying to ensure privacy and security. And I think the low, medium, and high types of data, I mean, that's something even as a consumer we have to think about. There are times when a free service is exactly what you want, and there are times when you need to be careful and secure your important personal information. So this has to be part protections and agreements there, and part consumer education on being able to make good decisions. Small and medium business the same way. And then finally, the opening up markets for innovation and allowing the full potential to be reached. I think that was a very good theme that we touched on today. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I'm not going to try to sum it up. I will take more time of everybody's time. I appreciate everybody being here. Thanks for having us here. Thanks, Dan. And thanks for everybody who participated here and remotely. And have a nice evening. Thank you.